Hello, welcome to Witch's Collection. I am your host, Sage. I am recording this live on Discord. So, this is a new thing I'm trying. I have set up a Discord. There's a little screening process on a Google form. You can find that on Tumblr, but I'll also link it below so that you can access it. The screening form is just to make sure that you're not like a troll or a raging bigot. It's just some very simple questions. It's totally fine to say that you don't know. But there are questions about some sensitive topics that we're going to be talking about today, about my opinions on. And it's basically just to figure out how tolerant are you of other people's beliefs. So, yeah, I don't really give a shit about how you feel about free will. I mean, I do, but I care more about, are you going to flame me for having a different opinion? Or other people for having a different opinion? To hopefully reduce, I'm the only moderator, hopefully reduce the amount of moderation. So that's really cool, but I'm going to be, hopefully, live recording the podcasts on there. So that'll be really cool if you're excited. Some exciting things there. You don't have to listen to the podcast on the Discord, it's just a space, witchy space in general. If you're looking for a witchy space that is, hopefully, I'm aiming to be not toxic, curated, and to develop some deeper discussions, so specifically if you're looking at doing more, quote-unquote, advanced witchcraft, but if you want to talk philosophy on there, and ethics, and create a space for us to share spells, and share things we've done, in hopefully what will be a mature space, that can elevate things that we've learned on social media or experiences we've had in real life, please do click the link below and do the little screening form and join. It will be really exciting once everything gets going. A secondary follow-up. Last week I tried my phone mic. This week I'm trying a new microphone that I have bought that I'm testing out. I do not have a boom arm for it, so I'm testing out if the noise of it moving is too loud. My apologies if there's any audio issues this episode. They will be resolved shortly. And please do let me know if this is better than the week before on my iPhone. Thank you so much for giving your feedback on that. And now on to the actual episode about the ethics of witchcraft. So, getting into the meat of it, somebody asked me a few weeks ago, and I've saved this up for this very important topic. An anonymous person asked me on Tumblr, I'm just getting started on studying witchcraft and I'm still getting used to it. I was browsing Pinterest last night and came across instructions on how to hurt people with any magic, and it made me sweat. I don't want to hurt anyone, even on accident. I'm going to stick with cooking and studying herbs for now. It is a beautiful world that I'm peeking into, but it's still human, and so it has some scary corners. Now, I find this particularly fascinating for multiple things. I will do an episode at some point on my opinions on social media and media literacy and the differences between paganism through the lens of the internet and paganism through the lens of anybody who's never been on the internet or not substantially on the internet. So hereditary witches, for example, or hereditary pagans, or people who found it before the internet exploded, and the differences that that's created in the craft. And I think that'll be a really fascinating discussion. But for today, we're just going to focus on the ethics of witchcraft, as the title suggests, and the idea of doing harm, specifically. Now, I can natter on about this forever, but you will hear three kind of main ethical principles that get floated around a lot on witchcraft and spiritual spaces online. The ones you will hear are karma, the threefold law, and the Wiccan Rede. Specifically, within the Wiccan Rede, the phrase, "An ye harm none, do what ye will." Now, they are fascinating. So karma was originally from Hinduism. It's originally a Hindu concept that's then kind of been latched onto and appropriated by neo-spirituality to essentially mean that if you do something good, if you're a good person and you do good things, you'll get good things, and if you're a bad person, you do bad things, you'll get bad things. And that's a very reductionist way of looking at it, my apologies. You can learn more about it if you're interested from people who are far more knowledgeable about that topic, but that is the generic definition, and the definition that you'll see a lot of that gets used a lot. And then you have the threefold law, which is very similar in the sense that if you do something, it will come back to you 3 times as strong. So that's if you do something good, it will come back 3 times as strong. Like, you'll get goodness back 3 times stronger, and if you do something bad, you'll get something bad 3 times stronger. And similarly, you have the Wiccan Rede, specifically, "An ye harm none, do what you will," which is, as long as it doesn't harm anybody, do what you want, or do what your will suggests you do, which is, to some people, will can mean what you want, and some people, will means your higher self, your will, your divine path, however you'd like to put it. Now, this is particularly interesting. I believe in none of these principles. So I heavily reject those. And I heavily reject those because they are the ethics that are so popular in these spaces, and the thing is that they're particularly popular in a way that devoids them of nuance. They're sentences or concepts that people just sort of chuck around to avoid having difficult conversations. So if you ask somebody, how do you feel about hexing, for example, which is like baneful magic, sometimes people will just say, well, any harm, none, do what you will. So they don't have to really consider it. Because they're like, that's good enough, that's an ethical principle, I could just sort of shove on it, and I don't have to think about it case by case, I don't have to do any moral particularism, I can just sort of tell you what I think in one sentence. And that's it. Similarly, threefold law or the karma, like the concept of karma gets thrown around a lot, and I think that robs us of having some really interesting and fascinating discussions, which we'll get onto. I also think that it is fundamentally dangerous because, again, we lose those nuanced conversations, and it then becomes a way to shame people. It's never seen, or the most of the times I've seen it used online, it's not a, well, I believe in the concept of karma, so I would do this, but do whatever you want. It is, this is the moral rule. This is the moral rule that everybody in witchcraft should follow. This is it. And ye harm none, do what you will. And especially with the Wiccan read, that gets thrown around a lot, and people can join that with witchcraft a lot, even though it's not the same thing, you'll hear that. You'll hear it in guides for baby witches, for beginner witches, of like, this is the ethical principle to follow. And because it's really nice to have an ethical principle that's so easily put up in a little bow, it's really lovely to have someone tell you this guiding principle that you can just always remember, and ye harm none, do what you will, the threefold law karma, because it's guiding and it's comforting when you're new to all of this and it seems daunting and terrifying and petrifying and full of pain, and you're really worried about hurting people. And so it's nice to have a thing that you can use that can be applied really easily. It really reminds me of utilitarianism, doing the greatest good. So it has those benefits. It's just easily applicable, it's frequently used, it's very applicable, and it robs you of having to think of anything deeper. You get to save having difficult conversations, because if somebody goes, well, why do you believe in karma? Why do you believe in the Wiccan Read? Why do you believe in threefold law? You can just say, well, I do. I believe in it. It's faith, right? I just believe in it. You don't have to have a reason. And so you can just believe anything you want as long as it makes you feel right. And having a rule makes you feel good. Now, we're going to get onto what I believe, which is a little controversial. This whole episode's a little controversial, to be fair. I believe that witchcraft is inherently unethical. Well, technically I abandon the terms ethical and unethical in my belief system and the way of viewing it. I think that viewing things as ethical and unethical are they're arbitrary boxes, right? Because a lot of the times in society, one act is ethical when it's done by one party, but the same person different person could do the same act and it would be deemed unethical for multiple things, including, prejudices. And so I think the terms ethical and unethical aren't these pure moral arbiters that we think they are. They are affected deeply by our own cognitive biases, by the way that we view the world, and all sorts of things. And people make allowances for those things, right? People do wiggle rooms, and morals change. Ethics change. Ethics and morals are things that flow throughout time. They're not like, this thing hasn't always been bad. And we like to pretend it is, but, there was a time when slavery was okay. And slavery still exists, and we just pretend it doesn't, because it's taken a different form, but it still does exist today. And a lot of people make allowances for slavery today. They choose to ignore it, and they choose to not think about modern slavery, because it's uncomfortable for them, but also, and they don't have to think about it in the same way, because it's a bit more sneaky, I suppose. It's not as common. It isn't in terms of like, people don't have to encounter it every day, so they can do wiggle room. But also because, I don't know, we tend to view that if people aren't being like slapped on the streets, that's not abuse. We have this idea that we have to see it to believe it almost. And so modern slavery isn't seen as really slavery by a lot of people, because we don't see it as the same thing. We've got a very specific idea of slavery in our society, and it's the old version of slavery that doesn't exist anymore. And there's a reason that propaganda exists, and there's a reason people believe that, but it is a particularly fascinating subject, is when we talk about good and bad, can you really talk about good and bad without thinking about everything that comes with that? And that includes Christianity, and includes all sorts of things, right? Can you? Interesting question for my audience. What do you think? This is getting really philosophical in here. But I fundamentally think that witchcraft is unethical, quote unquote, because what is witchcraft? Well, you are taking your will and you are imposing it. That's what you're doing every time you do a spell. This is an interesting discussion I've had multiple times in my life, is that, you know, if you're manifesting something, okay, say you go for a job, and it's what you and like 2 other candidates, right? And you manifest getting that job. Well, in manifesting getting that job, the other people didn't get the job. So you've taken that from someone else to give it to you. That's kind of selfish. You've done that because, you know, you're you and you've got to protect yourself and you think that you're the best candidate for the job, but you're making that decision based on your own needs, based on your own wants. You're not considering that for other people. You're not considering about maybe where the other person is at. Is the other person a worthy candidate? You don't know. You're kind of impacting the odds. You're changing things and manipulating things in your own favour. And we tend to view that, because it's easy to view that specifically only with baneful magic and love spells. Like, no, you're not allowed to do a love spell. That's manipulating someone else's free will. No, you're not allowed to do baneful magic. That's hurting somebody else. But isn't every kind of magic? If I'm doing a money spell to attract money, someone has to lose money for me to gain money. That money doesn't come out of thin air, right? If I'm manifesting, if I'm doing a spell to be lucky and find money on the ground, someone has to have dropped the money. Right? In order for me to get a random, you know, the bank that I'm with, for them to randomly give me 100 quid for whatever reason, that 100 quid has to come from somewhere. Those £100, that money has to come from somewhere else, has to be taken away. Now, I don't think this is always unethical. So, for example, the money coming from your bank, well, the money came from your bank. A bank isn't like an individual person, so I don't think that's bad in terms of, like, taking money from your bank, because they're a corporation, they can afford it. You're not, you know, no one's starving as a result. But I mean, in the case of your job, if the case of people losing money, you don't know where people are at. Maybe that 3 quid that they lost was really important. Maybe that 3 quid that they lost was going to buy them lunch. You don't know. And I think fundamentally witchcraft and spellwork is kind of manipulative. And oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes manipulative. And even when it's not manipulative, even when we're doing spells for other people, or we're taking care of our community, we're still viewing it through our lens, right? So when I do a spell for my friend because she's, I don't know, struggling, she wants to get a job, going back to the same job example here, I'm still prioritizing my friend over strangers because I have an emotional connection to her, right? So of course you will. They're your family, they're your friends, you're going to protect them, you're going to treat them well. But you're still prioritizing that emotional connection. Fundamentally, there is no difference, in as far as you're aware, between your friend. Your friend isn't automatically a better person than a stranger. You just care about them more because they're your friend. Now, I don't think all magic is inherently evil or awful, and I don't think this means that you should stop practicing witchcraft. I just think we need to get a little bit more uncomfortable with the idea that sometimes we do selfish things. And being selfish is okay. That's kind of part of being human. You can't give all of the time, and you're always only going to be able to look at things through your own lens. It would be a phenomenal ask for someone to go, well, you have the power to do this, so, I don't know, why don't you just wish world peace into the earth if you think you can manifest, right? Like, we don't. And we don't for a multitude of reasons, but also because we're selfish beings. We don't want world peace. No one wants world peace, really. This is a hot take, oh my god. That's not what we want immediately. We want world peace because we're good people and it's somewhere in the back of our brains, but if you ask most people, not every person, most people what they want, their immediate thoughts are money. They want to make sure they're safe, and then they'll do world peace afterwards, right? But they want to make sure that themselves and their loved ones are okay. World peace is an afterthought, and of course it's going to be an afterthought. You're going to think about the people that you have direct experience with. You're going to think about the ways that your life can directly improve. As much as we want to care about other people on the other side of the world, they're abstract to us. Their suffering is abstract to us. We know people are suffering, but we don't see it in the same way we see our friends suffering, so our empathy's kind of dampened in that sense. And so that makes sense. But it does mean that fundamentally it's selfish or unethical to be a witch. That's my hot take. I think also that getting into the hexing debate, that there is a true debate about sometimes hurting people is necessary, and sometimes it isn't. And there's a whole debate around that is worth you forming your own opinion. I'm here to share my opinion. You can fully disagree with everything I've said, and I would love love to hear people's different ethical thoughts. You know, that's the conversation I want to start with nuance here. But you can't spend your entire life, in a very mundane sense, you can't spend your entire life trying to avoid hurting people. You'll end up doing it. It's going to happen on accident, and you'll have to cope with the fact that sometimes you're the bad guy, sometimes you're the villain, sometimes setting boundaries means you're a bad guy, sometimes people will just view you like that for whatever reason, and you'll have to deal with it. You can't always be seen as nice, you can't always be seen as good. But also that, you know, witchcraft is magic, and witchcraft and spirituality and all of that, like whatever you want to call it, that it's power, right? It's a thing you've got responsibility over. If you think about it, it's a little bit like, I don't know, like sharp claws. Yeah, you could hurt people if you're not careful. And sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes it sounds, not like sometimes people need to be hurt, like, because then there's a debate about who chooses that. What gives you the right to choose when people have done something bad enough that warrants pain, for example? What made you the moral arbiter? But there is a thing of, like, sometimes people will get hurt, right? You can't just avoid living, and you can't avoid being a witch, you can't avoid being so scared of this religion or this practice because you're worried you're going to accidentally hurt someone. And if you are, maybe this isn't the right religion or practice for you, you know? Because this is a space full of people who get into it for all sorts of reasons, but there are a lot of people who end up being witches because they've had something traumatic in their life, or they've had something frustrating or difficult happen in their life, and they want vengeance, and that's how they start out. And you'll encounter those people. You'll encounter people who have had a hard time, and you can make a choice between being compassionate, potentially at the expense of yourself, or being harmful at the expense of them. And those are decisions that are made, and I don't think necessarily either of them is wrong. We view them in a very binary, like, right or wrong decision, but if, like, there's nuance to every situation, right? Like, what is the right act? I don't know, I can't tell you, but that's something you need to figure out for yourself. But I think that the conclusion here, the advice I would give, is to get comfortable being uncomfortable, to get comfortable with the idea of accidentally harming people. Even if you're not, like, I'm not saying necessarily you have to go full straightforward into hexing, full straightforward into, like, cursing people and, like, you know, turning people into frogs and becoming, I don't know, the Wicked Witch of the West. But get comfortable with the idea that this is a thing. This is a dangerous, almost like a wild creature, sometimes it can feel like. And, you know, it's beautiful, and it's powerful, and it's wonderful, and, like, it gives you better understanding of nature, and I think that it's genuinely a really wonderful, like, thing that I've experienced in my life that has made me feel so more at peace with everything. But it can be difficult, and you'll have to deal with your difficult emotions. And the thing is that, you know, you should be uncomfortable a lot of the time, because you're learning if you're uncomfortable. In that little sweet spot of being not comfortable with everything, but also not, like, so deeply uncomfortable you want to run away, but there's a little sweet spot in there, right? Just outside of your comfort zone. And that means you're going to have to do things like challenge your thoughts, and that is your responsibility. And so I think also, if you want to avoid hurting people as much as possible, then you can do that, but it's your responsibility to challenge your thoughts when they appear. It's your responsibility when you get angry to go, no, we're going to take a breather, we're going to learn some emotional regulation, we're going to take a breather, we're going to come back to this, we're going to circle back to this. But I also will say, having hexed people before, at times in my life, the world doesn't end. Like, you make mistakes and you learn, and that is how you learn, and that's how you learn what your boundaries are and what you're okay with and what you think ethically. And sometimes you have to do it. You have to fuck around and find out, right? You have to hex somebody to learn that was a bad idea, and to learn how that process works, and to learn whether you're comfortable with it and how that functions and where your lines are. You have to say something insulting to somebody to figure out that was not the right thing to say, and therefore learn the social cues and learn what's appropriate, you know? And I think that you do a better job accidentally hurting people and learning from it than never learning where the lines are and never learning what you're uncomfortable with at all, and then living in fear of doing anything because it might disrupt somebody's life or it might hurt them. But people are resilient. People will grow, and they will learn, and they will be at peace, and, like, you know, it's not like witchcraft gives you the power to kill people. right? It's not like witchcraft gives you the power to, like, irrevocably fuck up somebody's life so bad. You know, at most you're going to give them a really difficult time for a few months, I think, but I genuinely don't think you're capable of doing anything more than that, especially accidentally. You're not capable of doing anything more than that. We can have an argument about how strong and powerful witchcraft is when you're trying, and you're intentional and the moon is aligned and everything's going right, but if you're like, it's so difficult to just accidentally fuck up someone's life with witchcraft, because witchcraft's just intent. That's all it is. So, like, it's not like you're gonna accidentally put some spells ingredients together in the wrong order and, like, summon something like a demon that's gonna kill all your friends. It's not like that. There's no fear in that way. If your intent is good, you're probably gonna have a good outcome, and at most something will accidentally backfire or something will accidentally fuck up, and you'll feel guilty, and it will be an experience, and then you'll learn from it. You'll learn what you did wrong, you'll grow, you'll figure out what the fuck happened, and then you'll move on, and the person will be okay, and they'll learn, and they'll figure whatever things out, and things will work out. And yeah, I don't know, I would just say don't stick to cooking and studying herbs. Also, herbs are definitely the thing that would hurt people the most. This is my hot take as well. Cooking, you can accidentally give someone food poisoning for a very scientific point. And herbs you can actually poison people with. So I would argue that they're the most dangerous parts of witchcraft. Unless you hit someone with a crystal real fucking hard, you're not gonna accidentally knock someone out with a crystal. Sorry, minor pedantic point, I know. Don't hit people with rocks. PSA, I'm not advocating for anybody hitting rocks. I'd just like to state that. The other part of the ethics of witchcraft is more about the ethics of, I suppose, conducting, or the practical aspects of witchcraft, which means a discussion about cultural appropriation. Now, cultural appropriation is a very complicated and deeply complex subject, and I am British and white, so I am certainly not the best person to ask about this. If you're not sure what cultural appropriation is, because you've been living under a rock or you're not on social media, cultural appropriation is defined as by Wikipedia, is the inappropriate or unacknowledged adoption of an element or elements of one culture or identity by members of another culture or identity. This can be especially controversial when members of a dominant culture appropriate from minority cultures. Okay. Now, I am not here to tell you what and what isn't cultural appropriation. I have no authority over that. I can't tell you. What I can tell you is do your research, and do your research from people who specifically have come from that culture, right? Like, don't take the word of some white person online, basically. Hi, that's me. Do your own research, and do your own research from trustworthy sources, and again, going back to the idea of being uncomfortable, be okay with being wrong. Be okay with using something in your practice, and then learning that that was cultural appropriation and that was bad and you shouldn't have done that, and like move on from it. Like, listen to the people, take those notes, move forward with it, but don't like beat yourself up about it too much. You know, you've got to be uncomfortable with making mistakes like that. You've got to be uncomfortable, like, you didn't know, it's okay, you didn't know, no one's mad at you. People will be mad at you if you keep doing it and you know, but you didn't know, and now you know, so you can move forward, right? But don't, like, there's this urge, I think, when we get something wrong to be kind of defensive and almost like victim blamey. So don't do that. Move forward. Progress gracefully. But I can't tell you what cultural appropriation is. I can tell you to look out for it. I'm not going to name things. There are a lot of common examples of cultural appropriation that exist within witchcraft. You will find them if you Google. But not all of them are from reliable sources, I would like to point out. And the issue with cultural appropriation is that, say it with me, it lacks nuance online. Yay! So talk to people from those cultures, have conversations with them, because not everybody from one culture thinks one way, not everybody from one culture will tell you that this thing is wrong, and there is this conversation about cultural appropriation has been happening for a good long while, years. Like, there's so much to find out about this, there's so much research that has been done, and there's so many discussions that are being had in so many different spaces online that get a plethora of them. This might sound mental, but go find out what the Conservatives are saying, you know? Go find out what the Conservatives are saying about cultural appropriation. Go figure out, go learn what every voice, even the ones you don't like, are saying, and figure out how you feel about it, and figure out what's right, and figure out what people are saying, and listen to what people of those cultures are saying, and take that into account, and form your own opinion alongside that, and you'll have a good basis, right? I can't tell you what is and isn't cultural appropriation. I can't tell you what to believe and what not to believe. I can't tell you if Wicca is good or bad. I can't tell you anything about Sage, even though that's my name, because I have no authority to. But you can find out. You can find out. And I have my own opinions about those things. I've done my own research, but I'm not the person to tell you, right? But I would be remiss if I didn't mention it in this episode about ethics, because it's a very big discussion that happens a lot, but it lacks nuance. So I would avoid, especially if you're new to witchcraft, I would avoid getting your opinions on cultural appropriation from Tumblr or Pinterest or Instagram or TikTok, because there is no nuance there. Most people on TikTok don't cite their sources, and a lot of them haven't necessarily read academic literature, or haven't even talked to people in those communities about it, haven't had those nuanced discussions, so they're just saying things to be politically performative. And if you're new, you might not be able to figure that out. And people can say, by the way, politically performative things and be correct, but just have no understanding of why they're correct, right? And you can figure it out. So ironic that I'm so deeply critical of Tumblr despite being a Tumblrina, but you can figure it out, right? Like, you'll hear this a lot. People will say clicky buzzword statements at you, like, and ye harm none, do what you will, for example, and then you'll ask them a little bit more about it, and they don't always know. You'll just poke and prod them and ask them a question, like, interesting that you're using the Wiccan Read as a moral arbiter when Gerald Gardner did a lot of dodgy, controversial stuff, and, you know, did a lot of cultural appropriation, for example, and people will turn around and be like, oh, I didn't know about that, and you're like, interesting. And there's no, like, shame in not knowing, but a lot of people haven't prodded deeper into their own beliefs and will just say sentences. And they might be right, they might not be right, but, like, that's something to look out for. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of Witches Collection Chronicles. I hope you very much enjoyed it. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to be in the room where it happens, Hamilton reference, and pick out what topics of episodes I discuss, you should join the Discord server, which I mentioned at the beginning of the episode. The link will be in the description. There's a little screening process. And yeah, this episode topic was picked by my Discord people. We did a little poll. The other options included divination, crystals, and energy work, and the philosophy of witchcraft. But we settled on the ethics of witchcraft, and that was great. I also live record these on the Discord, so come and listen if you're interested in that, and have a lot more going on over there. We'd love to see you. We'd love to chat. We'd love to have you here. So yeah, if you're interested in that, get involved. As always, you can just send questions in via the Discord now, but also via Tumblr or via the Google form, which will be in the description somewhere. And I think you can also now do it on Spotify. But yeah, if you enjoy this podcast, let me know. If you have feedback or criticism, please let me know. I'm still figuring this out, as you can tell. But thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for coming along with the ride, and stay curious. Bye-bye.